Ironside will not be seen tonight, so we may bring you the following special program.
Word Balloon is brought to you by the League of Word Balloon Listeners.
If you like comic books, then you definitely like comic art. Visit comicartfans.com to see original comic artworks and custom drawings that people have collected and posted online. Coming soon, Comic Art Fans is hosting an in-person event called the Original Art Expo that will focus on the hobby of collecting original comic art. The Original Art Expo will be held at the Doubletree by Hilton Hotel in Orlando, Florida on January 26th through the 28th, 2024. They will have over 30 exhibitors and 60 comic artists. Spend the weekend in an intimate setting with some of the best creators in the world. Purchase or commission a piece of original comic art. Visit the comic art and illustration galleries. Attend the Saturday night auction and pizza party and hang out with your fellow comic art enthusiasts. The Original Art Expo is sure to be the world's premier visual storytelling art event, so don't miss out. Go to oa-expo.com to get your tickets today and visit comicartfans.com to see what comic art collecting is all about.
Hi, I'm Alex Ross.
The two pieces are sort of a type. They're both kind of recreations of artwork that existed in the 90s. In fact, this piece here for the Avengers is in most ways a recreation or a tribute to George Perez's poster version from the mid-90s, where he did a shot that featured in it a figure of Captain America that was very similar to what I've done here, positioning of the Vision or positioning of Hawkeye, and I believe a few other elements are very similar to that piece, and it's consciously so. I was building off that inspiration, but I kind of refitted my design to fill out bigger shots of the figures so that I was making a wider composition and getting in a lot of the same characters, but still not quite as many as what George himself did, because George's thing was always to try and get in the maximum amount of content into pieces that he did.
Welcome back, everybody. It's time again for Word Balloon, the comic book conversation show. John Suntress here. Always happy to welcome Pat Mills back to Word Balloon. It's good to see you, Pat. Thank you for joining me today.
Good to be here, John.
And man, how are things in Madrid? I always love talking to people in other parts of the world. We're flirting with winter. We've had a few frosts here and there. How about Madrid?
Well, it's southern Spain, so we're in the mountains, just above Gibraltar, and we've had our first rainy day. I don't expect anyone to feel sympathy for me, especially anyone in Britain. But I am amongst various other forms of hypochondria. I think I am a weather hypochondriac as well. So I think that's one of the reasons I'm here. I love the sunshine. So yeah, it's good, and we have a very short winter, which we will complain about, and do not expect to get any sympathy from anybody outside our village.
If I could live anywhere, Pat, I'd probably end up being your neighbor, because
it's a cool place to be. It's it's good, and it's very sociable. I mean, one of the dangers, I suppose, of living in any village anywhere is that you can become a bit insular and a bit hermit-like. But hey, thanks to social media, I can come out of my shell. So it's good.
We're going to talk about that, but we were talking about it a bit off the air. But you're here to talk about your brand new book, Page Turners. Pat, I'm telling you, I've read a lot of how to write comic books before. There's a clarity to this book. And I think it's great that not only do you get into different genres, in fact, people can see for the video, for the audio audience, I'll describe the cover, that you've got a tablet in front of you or a big phone, and mentioning some of your fantastic work over the years at 2000 AD, Charlie's War, Martial Law, Space Warp, your wonderful sci-fi anthology book, Misty, I'm so glad you have thoughts on romance comics, because I kind of think there's been a bit of a resurgence in attempting romance comics, and I love what you've done with it. But of course, too, we're going to have to talk about Doctor Who and the Star Beast and some of your other contributions to the Whoverse in various forms. Pat, I am so glad that Russell T Davies and company have given you the credit, you and Dave Gibbons, that you rightly deserve, and also the compensation for said credit, adapting your original comic book story, The Star Beast, to be the first of the 3-part 60th anniversary special. That's fantastic.
It's a real thrill. It's I don't know, maybe it's a karmic thing. You know, what goes around comes around, because I had a very rough time on Doctor Who back in the what would it have been, the late 80s, I think, mid 80s, and I kind of persevered. And you sort of think at the time, why did I put myself through all that? But I'm a bit of a believer in fate and destiny and so on. So whilst I'm really appreciative of Russell in particular for making it all happen, I also think, you know, maybe destiny gave it a little bit of a nudge as well.
Well, it's wonderful. You know, years ago, I've had Dave on the show a few times, and I asked him, did he have because you guys spent so much time with the Fourth Doctor in comics. I asked him, I said, oh, did you enjoy it? And he said, well, it was a job. He goes, you know, honestly, William Hartnell was my doctor. And he said, as much as I appreciated the job, he said, you know, I really had no special allegiance to Tom Baker, the current comics. The Doctor, was it Doctor Who Monthly or Weekly that the comic appeared in?
It started off as Doctor Who Weekly, and then inevitably, because it's a newsstand magazine, it became Doctor Who Monthly, and I think now it's incorporated into Doctor Who Magazine. So de facto, it's still going. Yeah.
That's cool. Were you, I mean, you know, growing up, was this one of your shows? Were you too old? I mean, because it was originally a kid's show after all.
Well, I think it's a cue for a bit of violins here, you know, because I'll tell you why. We didn't have a TV. that's what we call in Britain a cardboard box story after Monty Python. You lived in a cardboard box. You were the lucky ones. So, we didn't have a television, so and I don't remember my school friends coming back, and it would have been the Hartnell era, because I'm contemporary with Dave Gibbons, and I don't remember them talking about Doctor Who. So it was, it kind of passed me by. In fact, all science fiction did, until Star Trek. And I started as a journalist in Scotland for DC Thompson's in Dundee. And my colleague was John Wagner, the co-creator of Judge Dredd. And he said, you've got to watch Star Trek. And I think my reply was something like, what's Star Trek? You have to watch it. He was my, what would you call it, popular culture mentor. So obviously from Star Trek, I progressively took an interest in other science fiction, and there wasn't that much of it about. I didn't particularly care for Space 1999, which was around at the time. And I suppose you could say that John Pertwee would have been my personal Doctor Who. But I know that whoever watches it for the first time with their individual Doctor, they'll swear by that one, and it'll be like, no, the others, they're just. And everyone gets very, very heated about it, including right through to the present day. So I think that was one of the good things about the Star Beast and everything, that everyone seemed on side on it. I've looked through the sort of social media messages, and I think there would probably only be, what shall we say, one in a couple of hundred, which is remarkable for science fiction fans. Only one disgruntled comment here and there. You know, a little bit of a troll-like shot over the parapet kind of thing. But compared to some recent Doctor Who's prior to that, with is it Jodie Whittaker and so on, where there was a lot of fan critical views on all that, none of which I have a perspective on. So I'm not caught in the middle of any of them.
I understand, and I don't blame you. And it's, you know, again, has nothing to do with the Star Beast. And originally, in your comic, it was the Fourth Doctor, a Fourth Doctor story. Tom Baker, correct?
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, there's a panel from it, one of Dave's panels and stuff, and there indeed is the Meep. So fun, interesting, deceptive character. I think we can slightly spoil, given that it's been out for almost a week now.
I think so.
Yeah. So tell me about the creation of the Meep for this story.
Okay. Well, in terms of how it came about, and just as an aside there, just seeing that image on the screen, I love Dave's eyes. I think the way he's got those eyes there are fantastic. And wonderful as the television version of the eyes are, I'm not sure they quite got that particular look. It's a spectrum of cute expressions, isn't it? And I think Dave got something quite alien on that one. But anyway, it's all good. But in terms of how it was, I had a pet guinea pig. In fact, I had two, and they both died. But I was, as what would I have been, 9 or 10 or something. You know, kids are very fond of pets now, and I was especially fond of these guinea pigs, who are white and fluffy, and they were Abyssinians, I think. Yeah, Abyssinians as opposed to Peruvians. And of course the noise they made when they could hear my footsteps approaching was meep meep. So that was the first very positive aspect of the Star Beast, or the inspiration for the Star Beast. This very cute creature, and then there was a negative, which perhaps inspired the kind of Jekyll and Hyde aspect to the alien. And this was that my ex-wife, Angela Kincaid, is a very successful commercial artist. And she had, at the time, she was producing birthday cards. Now, I imagine in the States, you probably have something like Hallmark that probably does these. I'm not sure. But there was a speciality somewhere in the 70s of really cute creatures, pink and fluffy, white and fluffy, with big eyes and everything. And they were like, you know, it's a kind of thing that rather silly people would think, oh, isn't that lovely, and all this kind of stuff. And I guess after she airbrushed these things, and she had them on an assembly line, because that's how you have to produce commercial art. You've got to knock them out one after the other. Sure. And I guess after she got to about her 100th cute, furry, meat-like animal, she was getting quite annoyed at the whole thing and being quite negative about them. And that really stayed with me. The idea of just, oh God, I can't face another one of these creatures. So that was the inspiration, really, for the Meep, and knowing that there was this market, and you know, putting my cynicism to one side. There is something, whether we like it or not, and I'm speaking to myself in particular, there is something about fluffy, cuddly creatures that does something to our subconscious. Doesn't matter about the logic, doesn't matter if anyone say, well, you know, come on, it's an alien or whatever. It does something to us, it reaches us. I suppose in the same way that we automatically reach out to a kitten or a cub of any predator.
True.
And
Yes.
it does something to us. And so I really wanted to press that button. And having found that button, then the rest of it really was to create, what shall we say, a very urban Britain that had not really been seen in Doctor Who, and which Russell, I think, was the first to really focus on. And there's a complex backstory to this, which I won't go into detail. But in summary, I think prior to Russell, Doctor Who had been some good, some bad, but the emphasis was increasingly, what should we say, science fiction, maybe middle class, maybe a little intellectual, whatever. And Russell took it to back to what you might call almost a British sensibility. And it's that same British sensibility that I went for with Star Beast. So it's not surprising that he would remember that story from his youth, and because it's like a forerunner to his approach.
Agreed. Absolutely, man. A couple comments from the audience already. Dave Silly says, good morning. Deeply enjoyed the Star Beast, but by far my favorite part of the episode was seeing Pat and Dave's name in the opening. I completely agree. And Jared has an interesting question. When working on Doctor Who comics, did you hear much at the time from the Doctor Who production offices, or were you generally left to do as you wanted?
Well, when we were working on Doctor Who comics, this is John Wagner and myself, we wrote alternative stories. We were very much left to our own devices. The Doctor Who production people, to my knowledge, never intervened on anything. Now, I know where, because I've also written audio.
Yes, I want to talk about that. Indeed.
Yeah, now I know there the production office does take a much stronger interest. Maybe where comics are concerned, maybe they leave it up to the editor, or maybe it's just because we got it right. But there was no sense of, oh, we don't like the way you're going on this. There was none of that. So that was very positive. Yeah.
Talking to Dan Slott, who just did a Doctor Who graphic novel for Titan. I think Titan might have a tighter relationship with the production offices, and you do get more notes now. Tell me about Big Finish. I love those audio dramas and what they call the wilderness years between Sylvester McCoy and the show coming back with Christopher Eccleston. God, they really did right by so many, like Colin Baker. I always felt bad for his television run, but I really felt that the Big Finish stories did him right. And certainly Paul McGann from that one television film really made dozens, if not more, Big Finish adventures. And I love what Nicholas Briggs and company do there. And I mean, they love the characters, they love the universe. And I think they have and you'll tell me if it's not a heavy hand, but certainly a willing collaborator. Tell me the experience of writing the Big Finish audios.
Well, I can't speak. I can speak endlessly positively about Big Finish. I mean, first of all, the thing you mentioned, which was that they kept Doctor Who alive in the wilderness years. Now, that's a hell of an achievement. And it doesn't just extend to Doctor Who. They also have done it where, is it Quatermass? And there's probably a couple of other things that I don't even know about.
I even like their Prisoner adaptations. I thought they did a very good job. I mean, that's a tall order to match what McGowan did. And they found inventive audio ways of doing a couple Prisoner in the Ghost stories.
They are really dedicated. And not only are they dedicated creatively, but they are also dedicated commercially. And they do something which I sing their praises on regularly, which obviously seems obvious to them, seems obvious to you, and seems obvious to me, but is not obvious to British comic publishing companies. They do the right thing. Now, what I mean by the right thing is they don't look at the contract and say, well, we own all rights to this, so we can do what the hell we want with it, and you can go and get stuffed. Which is the attitude of every single British comic publisher. And they said to me on a number of things, look, we want to do this and we want to do that. We know we can, but we want to be able to help you. We want to acknowledge your contribution. And for a small company, I mean, you know, they're despite the sheer volume, they're not some vast conglomerate. And I really valued that, and I still value it to this day. It made and the thing that, as a result, everyone, I'm sure, Doctor Who fans, comic fans, and so on, will all speak very highly of them because they did the right thing. And that's what fans want these publishing houses to do for creators. It makes commercial sense. And the sad thing is that if you said, and I have said to many British publishers, well, look, if you do the right thing by me and by others, this will gain you so much fan acclaim. You will increase your sales. They don't see it that way. They just say, well, we've got the contract, so you can clear off.
Piss off. Yeah, I hear you, man.
So there's a lot. And so at the moment, I tend to really push this idea because I think if it becomes more well known that doing the right thing is not just a moral thing, it actually is commercially is a huge benefit because that's how we all operate. If someone helps us on something, then we help them on something else. And it's how the world goes round. It works a lot better that way rather than saying, well, according to my contract, I don't owe you anything. And that just puts everyone in a very defensive mood. And it means that the publishers are out of touch with the fans because what the fans want, they're very supportive of some of my, what shall we say, my militant gripes on the subject. But what they really want is for everyone to get on with each other because they're not really that interested in whether someone got ripped off on this or that product. What they really want to know is that everyone's enjoying themselves because they're enjoying themselves. And I've really seen this on Doctor Who. So it was quite an emotional thing for me, just seeing that love of Doctor Who and the Star Beast and what Dave and I had produced. It was quite emotional, yeah.
I totally get it, Pat, and I agree. And it's with all the ills of social media, it has given fandom a voice to challenge the powers that be and say, wait a minute. I mean, we've sadly, it happens in the States as well, where ideas, my God, Ed Brubaker was very public with as great of him creating the Winter Soldier idea. Then they took the movie and he's like, yeah, I got chump change for a very important cog in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And it's wrong. And again, now, I mean, or God, when Hugh Jackman kind of shamed, I think, Marvel for one of the Wolverine movies, probably Logan, and he pointed to the great late Len Wein and said, I wouldn't be standing here if it wasn't this man creating the character. And all of a sudden then Marvel, certainly it's just like Siegel and Schuster, the multi-millions that DC has made over the decades, even though they finally in the 70s were able to compensate the creators of Superman and give them a pension and a livable pension, it still was nothing compared to the multi-millions they made with the character. And as you say, just do the right thing. And I love the way you depicted in Page Turners regarding Russell and the current Doctor Who people compensating you and Dave Gibbons. I think
because they didn't have to. And they might have said, well, they would probably have known that if they hadn't, I would probably have kicked off. But I genuinely feel that was not the reason they did it. I don't think they did, he'll make trouble, so we'll pay him some money. I don't think it was like that. It didn't feel that way. And also in terms of the inviting us to Doctor Who, to the
Yes.
studio and everything, which was an astonishing experience. It didn't feel that way. It didn't have to be that way. And what you're saying is interesting. Just as a quick aside, it sounds like in the States, Marvel and DC can ultimately, if you like, be named and shamed into doing the right thing. It's interesting because, these are huge companies, right? I mean, they're as big as you can get. Yeah. Warner's or whoever owns Warner's and Disney and so on.
Certainly.
By comparison, the Brits are made of tougher stuff. There's going to be. I think I've worked it out. That I think they see it as a power battle. I know that's ridiculous because I think this is an aside, but I think it's an important one. I think with Marvel and DC, they think, well, we want to keep the fans on side, so let's do it. Maybe whatever. But I think I'm thinking of Rebellion and 2000 AD in particular. I think they see it as a power thing, and it's interesting because what it means is that power is more important than sales. So I tried humanizing them. Let me see, was it about 4 years ago? And I think my first book, that's 5 years ago, Be Pure, Be Vigilant, Behave, The Secret History of 2000 AD. And I think I said something about, we don't even get a Christmas card from them. I mean, I still get a Christmas card from DC. Considering my seminal role on 2000 AD, it would be nice to get a Christmas card. And I think 1 year they sent me a Christmas card, and then after that, no more. It's a distancing from the creators, and that distancing is not unique to Rebellion. It also applies to Panini and Titan Books, and back in the day when they owned the British comic catalogue Egmont. There's a distancing from creators. So it's a rather a British phenomena. It must be something in the British character or the British corporate character. So by comparison, Marvel and DC are way ahead of us.
A little.
Remarkable.
A little. But I hear you. And truly, really, not just the current book, Page Turners, but as you say, Be Vigilant, the other books, your memoirs, essentially, of your experiences in the business. A great education for people in the States like me, that it's there's just of course, and maybe you guys feel the same way when you get books from the States, but I really there was always a charm about seeing 2000 AD, Rebellion, Doctor Who Monthly, for that matter. My God, I remember it being an import in the 80s when I was in college, and I would pick up Doctor Who Monthly because I had grown up on the Pertwee and Baker years on American television, and was really excited to see, oh my God, there's a magazine about Doctor Who. Fantastic. I mean, I'm a Star Trek guy as well. I'm a longtime Star Trek guy. So and as I said, mentioning The Prisoner, I'm a bit of an Anglophile when it comes to British sci-fi and spy entertainment, and I've certainly enjoyed the best shows like The Avengers and The Prisoner. And I mean, and even now I find myself kind of hunting on YouTube where they pirate Adam Adamant. I had never seen that before.
Adamant. Yeah. Now you've mentioned it, I shall see if there's a YouTube of Adam Adamant. Yeah, he was great. All I can remember was, it's a very dashing Victorian character who travelled through time. That's got my interest. I'm making a note.
If I find a link, I'll send it to you. That'll be I would be my pleasure. Absolutely, man. Let's see another comment. Let me see what we got here. Mike Jones, everybody. UK comics seem to more to drift into old-fashioned British class war on creator rights and relationships than in the States. Yeah.
I'm afraid so. It's and I've kind of what I did briefly is that whereas the majority of British creators went to work for the States, And by comparison, I went to work for France because the French market is very, very good. And they don't have superheroes. And I'm incapable of, I mean, I can write critical views of superheroes like martial law, but and I have very occasionally written what you might call a mainstream superhero comic, like I think I did a Batman and so on. But France tends to be more my heartbeat. So essentially what's happened is that British comics have shrunk. And one of the things that I wanted to do with page turners was say to a new generation that there are ways out of this. It's not inevitable. That we have a kind of attitude in Britain, which I suspect is a rather British thing, which is to say, it's all over, it's finished, let's just give up. It is a very British attitude, and I say that with absolute surety because when myself and John Wagner largely rebuilt the British comic industry with Battle, Action, and 2000 AD, and but at the time the atmosphere was quite dark and depressed, and there's actually a reason for it, which is perhaps relevant because fans may sometimes say, but why does it have to be like that? Well, the reason is actually quite simple, is that everyone concerned who was capable of making changes in comics were staff writers or editors. Now, John Wagner and myself were both freelancers, which means you're only as good as your last story. So you've got to be damn good. It makes you hungry. So
Yes.
that's why they're so good, is because we're freelancers. But if you're staff and the publisher comes to you and says, look, can you do something about these terrible British comics? We want to revive them. We want them to be exciting and everything. They will, of course, say, yes, sir. And they will probably put some effort into it and maybe a bit more than usual on occasion. But at the end of the day, they work 9 to 5, 5 days a week. They've got, so, and if the project falls through, and so many of them do, there's a high mortality rate on comics all over the world, well, they get their redundancy. So that was the attitude I was faced with all those years ago. And I know it's still there today. And it also means you owe an allegiance to the boss, which a freelance doesn't. So a freelance I would say to the publisher, well, I think you should do this or that. And I could be much more daring in what I said because I'm freelance and I don't have to have what seems to be, and I've actually witnessed it to my horror, a kind of subservient attitude towards publishers that, I don't know, I thought it was something they had in, it's just awful. I just can't imagine that sort of relationship. It's it should be a creative relationship. And so it's disappointing, but that's actually what's really gone on. And with page turners, one of the things I try to push as strongly as I can is that it's outsiders that have made a difference. Don't assume because you haven't worked for Marvel or DC or 2000 AD that you can't change things, that you can't make a difference. It's probably a good thing that you didn't work for them, because most of the creative changes, certainly in British comics, have come from outsiders. And I would include myself to a large extent there. But if you think of the original Eagle by Frank Hampson and Reverend Marcus Morrison, they were rank outsiders and they were loathed by the industry. It's like, how dare these people come in and have a million-selling comic? It's often outsiders who will do it because they think in a different way. They're not hidebound by what the pressures at conventions or peer pressure or whatever it is. Another example would be a Viz comic, which is, you know, this very uniquely British product. Again, a huge seller, absolutely huge seller, produced by people way outside the system. So this is the point I stress in Page Turners. If you're an outsider and you're creative, you could maybe make it work. And with all the advantages of social media and print on demand and all these things, yeah, it's absolutely possible. The only thing you need ultimately is the courage to do it.
Understood, and absolutely the drive and the edge that you get by being a freelancer. No, I get that. We'll even go back to film and think of the old studios and their traditional films going into the late '60s. And you know, it took the guys making Easy Rider and films like that really upset the studio system and made a difference. And the public was ready for something different, as I imagine they were when you and John and Dave and others were kind of coming up with these great new ideas. And I love that in Page Turners, you know, you reference all of these wonderful projects over the years. Martial Law, my God, I think that was the first thing I read of yours, Pat. You and Kevin O'Neill, and it was disruptive in the best way, as was that period in the mid '80s of the direct market here in the States, and I imagine as well over there as you're describing it and stuff. No, we were ready for something new, and it was great. And I mean, I was of college age, so I was used to the traditional DC and Marvel product. But I was, and still enjoy it even to this day. But again, I love the differences. Discovering, Franco and Belgian Bidet comics. Charlie's War, right? Was that your French?
Yeah.
That
was British. Although, again, it's interesting. I mean, it's been there's been different European editions of it, including a Finnish edition, an Italian edition, a Dutch edition. But the French edition has probably outsold the original British edition. There's something about the French and the way they get behind things that is really, really encouraging. It's in their DNA, I'm afraid. You know what I mean? In the DNA, and I think Britain is a kind of hybrid of the United States and Europe. On political levels, and I'm afraid culturally as well. Good and bad, there's some good stuff from it. It's arguably feasible that our storytelling is strong because of our American influence and our British influence. French storytelling is very cool and very sophisticated, but isn't necessarily as strong as storytelling from what you might call the Anglo-American aspect, but they are very slick, and they're very wedded to culture in a way that in Britain, at least, they will sort of say it's almost like well, are you lucky to be working in comics? You know, why do you want money as well? It's almost that kind of attitude. Whereas they see it as an art. They see it as an art form.
No, please finish your thought. Excuse me.
Yeah, more so, I think, than anywhere else, really. I think they really see it as an art form. I mean, manga is different again, and then you've got the United States, and then I think Britain would be probably number 4 in that list. But in terms of art productions, most of the European companies do some very, very beautiful books, generally of a higher quality than produced in Britain. So, and as these countries are often much smaller than the UK, you can't really say, well, it's to do with money and so on. It's a love of culture, and they just have to. The Finnish version of Charlie's War is just, you're thinking, my God, it's high quality paper and all that. And of course, you know, I kind of grew up writing British comics, which were produced on what we call bog paper. And I think in the United States it's very similar. It's very rough paper. And although there are fans who still love that and actually like the old wallpaper.
I do too. Yeah, news rag, I think, is what we call it here.
Yeah,
but yeah, that's traditional.
Sounds better. Yeah.
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 No, I hear what you're saying. Absolutely. Well, when Greg Rucka and Michael Lark and Ed Brubaker were doing Gotham Central, the Batman Police book, it was a very pulpy book. So it was nice to get it on, frankly, pulpy paper. So I get what you're saying in terms of the quality. You want your art to look as best as possible. So of course you want the best paper and the best printing processes. So.
Yeah. There's these two markets that you have to feed, both of them. One is the collector's market in very broad brushstrokes, and the other is the populist market, which can be for an audience as young as 6 or 7. I mean, I'm always vaguely horrified when I find out that there were 6-year-olds reading Prog 1 of 2000 AD. I think, oh my God, really? But I'm fascinated by that, what is often called a kind of down market. I'm fascinated by that popular culture market. And I don't know if it's going to go anywhere, but I'm talking at the moment to a publisher, a French publisher, about webtoons, which means that you look at them on your mobile phone. And to me, it's quite probable that that is the inheritor of those original pulpy bog paper comics of not even yesteryear, but the year before that. And so I think webtoons is pressing that same button. Now, whether it all comes together or not, for me personally, I think that's a great direction for things have to take. The market's always changing, constantly changing, and that was something I was very aware of from when I first started in comics. Is that which makes it exciting. In other words, what you're doing one year is great, and then the next year things have changed a bit, and maybe it's not as popular as it was, or maybe a writer or artist has gone off the boil. But it was very interactive with the audience, and I especially like, and this is why I did Space Warp, which was aimed at readers of all ages. But I absolutely adore the comments and criticisms of 10 and 11-year-olds, and they are very, very polite, very precise. But they're very different to an adult appraisal. And they're quite demanding to work for because they're smart, they're intelligent, but they're still developing. Their brains are still evolving. So sure. There's some things that are just not going to register with them. And I find all that really challenging. And I think, and it's great to work for that. But of course, there's so many films and comics and so on that do cross the generations. James Bond being a case in point. A 10-year-old can enjoy that, and a 60-year-old can enjoy that. And so that for me is the challenge, to try and work across the generations, and also, if possible, across genders, for a family audiences, as well as other audiences.
Honestly, Pat, I'm so glad to hear that. As a former radio broadcaster, a lot of my broadcast brethren and friends, I've always said, hey, you really got to be aware of what's happening online, and don't just rely on the television and radio jobs that you might be able to get, because you could take your audience, as I have, and put it online and have your community. And again, what I think you've done in this phase of your writing career, you're paying attention to what's going on. And in fact, even as we were talking off the air before we started, you were telling me about, and I was curious about how Substack is working for you, how Space Warp is working for you. I'm really glad that you were able to put together this great anthology of sci-fi stories. And I mean, you certainly understand the formatics of anthology, sci-fi anthology. But no, it's great. And also, this is a big part of Page Turners as well, as you say, explaining it can be done. You don't need to wait for that job from 2000 AD or Rebellion. So.
Well, yeah, Substack is fantastic, and I would recommend it to any prospective writer. We focus mainly on text material, like Page Turners, but it has certain advantages from an artistic and creative point of view, which is when I used to produce weekly comics like 2000 AD, we were often probably only about 6 issues ahead of the audience. So there was this quite scary cliffhanger thing. And it was probably not that different in the States. There may be only 3 or 4 issues ahead of, whatever the Hulk is doing. And so you're paying very close attention to what the audience are saying. And it's possible to do the same thing with Substack. So the advantage for me was I started a new series, text thriller called MI7 Assassin, which is a spy thriller. And I've been planning it for 5 years. And I'd probably have just carried on, I don't know, improving it, polishing it, and so on. And the prospect of producing it as one big entity is quite daunting. It's quite scary. But if you produce it in weekly chunks, which is what Substack you can do on Substack, it has 2 advantages. One, I've painted myself into a corner. So now I've got to do it. So it's already out. MI7 Assassin is out there on iconoblast.substack.com. So I pushed myself into a corner, which I think is the right thing to do, because writers do need a push every so often. Otherwise, I'll do it next week, do it next month, do it next year, etc. So we need, and this obviously goes twice at least for artists. Artists are even worse. So that's the first thing. But the second thing is, it's part of a long serial tradition that goes back, I think, to the 19th century, where you had Alexander Dumas, Charles Dickens. They were producing all their fabulous works. They were producing them in weekly sections. And if you look really closely on occasion, you can actually see where that was a weekly episode. You know what I mean? Where they put in a cliffhanger. Yeah. I would swear in the case of Oliver Twist, there's one whole section where it felt to me as a child when I read it, I thought, the pacing has slowed down here. It's a bit padded. I didn't use those words because I didn't know. I just knew something was odd. And then I thought as an adult, yeah, that's what it was. But yeah, you've got to do what you've got to do. So, but it's having that excitement of the cliffhanger ending and thinking, how's he going to get out of this situation? And we all love that from those kind of movies, the matinee movies, where how is whoever it is, Tarzan or Flash Gordon, how are they going to escape this situation? It's a thrilling moment. And so to be able to create that on Substack is really exciting. From a financial point of view, it's good. I mean, we're in, I suppose, just about completing what you might call the first year of trading. And we've got good paid subscribers and a lot of free subscribers as well. And from a business point of view, that's actually the way you should do it. So anyone who's thinking of doing it, well, you might want to make your stuff free at least to begin with. And then depending on how well known you are and how the strength of the product that you are producing, you have some behind a paywall. But it's good to have a mixture of the two, I think. And then, of course, the other advantage of Substack is that you get feedback from your audience, so that by the time MI7 Assassin is actually ready to come out as a book, which will probably be towards the end of next year, I would suspect. There will be criticisms and suggestions and places where, I've maybe missed a trick. And I know that's applied to a lot of other authors. A little scarily, actually, the writer of Fight Club, whose name escapes me at the moment, he did a first draft of his latest novel on Substack. And he said that in the light of the feedback he's had, he's going to restructure it and rewrite it entirely.
Wow.
And I was thinking, oh my God, I hope that doesn't apply to me. But who knows? I have to wait and see. So
great.
I think it's interacting with the audience, which is absolutely, which is what we all want to do anyway. I mean, we're all of us writing for an audience. And so the more we're in touch with who is that audience and how do we reach them? And all those things are possible, it seems to me, with social media in a way that probably, well, it wasn't there before. It just kind of, things fell into place often by accident. In other words, hey, we've got a hit here. How did that happen? I don't know. That was the sort of attitude.
Sure.
Whereas, I mean, I go into it a little bit on page turners, not comprehensively, because the social media market is constantly changing. So anything you say in 18 months is going to be out of date.
Agreed.
But there's the whole business of, for instance, one of the things I want to do with MI7 Assassin when it comes out as a book and as a complete ebook is to reach a new audience. And to do that, you have to understand the algorithms of Amazon. And that's an art form in itself. Sooner or later, there's going to be someone who really understands the algorithms of Amazon. And I do not pretend that I do. And my wife, Lisa, who publishes these books, she has a fair understanding. But it is quite daunting. But someone who really understands it, a bit like a gambler working out when you put your money on red 6 or whatever, they are going to have a runaway bestseller. And that's the thing, that for creators today, especially for writers, you've got to develop these new art forms. You cannot, the days where you could be a hermit, sitting away, typing your stories, sending it off to a publisher and so on. I'm not convinced they ever really existed anyway, but they existed to a degree. But now, I mean, this is even going back, let me see, about 9 years ago. So it's not that long ago, but that's an indication of how social media is endlessly progressing and changing. I was in line for a possibility of writing a comic book version of James Bond. And the first thing the publisher said was, how many followers has he got on social media? Now, at the time, I was quite outraged because I was thinking, well, I can buy followers on social media. But underlying that response, there is some sense in it that a lot of your audience is going to come through social media now. And it's no good wishing it or otherwise. That's how it is. It's the same with Amazon. All of us regret that we are all funneled through this giant, but it's how it is. And we have to find, as best we can, ways of making it work and retaining as much integrity and independence as we possibly can. And I mean, these are all things I'm quite familiar with because, well, you've got to compromise the whole darn time in publishing popular media. So, as long as the compromise isn't too unbearable, then that's what you do.
That's half the trick. You're absolutely right about that. And also, again, being very cognizant of where the market is and how best to get your stuff in front of people. Mike says, Pat has written every type of genre successfully. Does he have a particular favorite?
Oh, that's a difficult one. I suppose, I guess it has to be World War One, which is Charlie's War and MI7 Assassin. I'm not sure favorite is quite the right word for me, because I'm driven to write it. It's like I feel I have to. It's like there's a vacuum there that I feel I have to fill. So maybe if I was left to my own devices and there was I wasn't driven by anything, what would it be? Probably girls' comics. Probably girls' comics. And there's a reason for that, which sounds a little selfish and so on, is that if you write a girls' comic story, you don't have to create these fantastic worlds, which I'm often associated with. You don't have to think, well, what's his helmet look like? What's his gun look like? What do the aliens look like? Well, you have to, if you have aliens in a girls' comic story, obviously they've got to look okay. But for the most part, you don't have that. So it's quite a lazy, I say lazy, it's a more relaxed way of writing, let me say. And so it's quite enjoyable from that point of view. Although even there, that's one of the reasons I devote quite a large section in Page Turners to girls' comics.
Yes.
I'm a little scared that the rules of girls' comics will be lost, and therefore someone's going to come along maybe decades from now, and they've got to learn those rules all over again. And my sort of comment to them would be this: look, read this section on girls' comics, and you can save yourself a lot of grief, because that's what we did. It's not like we were particularly wise. They were, generally speaking, written by men, myself and others, John Wagner and Jerry Finley Day and so on.
Yes.
In our early 20s. And we all wrote girls' comics for a reason that wouldn't perhaps pass muster today, because most female journalists wanted to work on glossy magazines and they didn't like girls' comics. And maybe we were just fascinated by the rules of them, and the rules are very specific and they're not necessarily completely obvious. For example, just one brief instance here. You can have a cruel stepfather, you can have a cruel stepmother, you cannot have a cruel mum or a cruel dad. Now, that was back in the day. Demographics and family life has changed. Who knows, it might be different today, but I suspect not. It's like a girl reading these stories needs to feel that she's got, and of course there are lots of he's reading it as well. They've got to feel something is real that they can hold on to. So if mum or dad are pretty horrible, and of course in real life, sadly, that is the case, sure. It's like everything is falling away. Another thing with girls' comics is that they are often seen as quote unquote stupid or soppy, and that is so far removed from the truth. Again, an example: when John Wagner and I started, they saw that we were good at writing girls' comics, but they gave us a story to write which completely defeated us. And they were poor judges of who we were in our early 20s. They said, write a story called Anne's Animal Sanctuary. And it's about, now, a story like that, we were completely stuck. I mean, we were chaps in our early 20s watching Star Trek and things. What do we know about it all? And it defeated us. And I think we eventually threw the towel in on that one. But today, animal sanctuaries, I actually know a great deal about, and they are full of the most poignant, emotional stories. Because first of all, whoever's running the animal sanctuary is quite a character. It has to be, by definition, it's someone who's volunteering their time to look after sick or damaged creatures or whatever. Yeah. And there's all these different creatures and how they interact with each other. And I know because of animal sanctuaries here in Spain, And often I hear these stories, and it's almost like I don't want to know anymore because otherwise I want to write a girl's comic story about it. But they're full of real emotion and character. And it would be a great shame if all those stories were, I don't know, if that genre was lost forever, because it seems to be primarily a British genre. Rebellion have, to their credit, reprinted some stories like Misty and so on. But
Yes.
by and large, it's now that the one exception, and of course, this is now ancient history. That's what we're talking 15 years ago. So in today's publishing world, that's a lifetime as well. But there was a European series called Witches, W.I.T. whatever. And it was basically a kind of female Harry Potter. Now, of course, it's a natural, right? It's sold all over the world. All over the world. I believe there were even Muslim editions where the
Wow.
lengths of skirts were they're longer and so forth. So it was a colossal hit. And what's remarkable, it originated from I think it was Italian Disney. Now you would imagine that it would have also. There were two countries in the world where it didn't register, Britain and the United States. I actually read something which sounded very much like Sour Grapes, where Disney were, the parent Disney was like, well, we don't know what this is about, from this subsidiary in Italy, that kind of thing. And it was similar in Britain, but this was a colossal hit. And it was a hit on the newsstands, which again is something I know we were talking about it before we went on air. It's something that's disappeared in the States. We're hanging on by our fingernails in the UK to the newsstand market. But in Europe, so you could go along to one of these kiosks in France or Germany or whatever, and there would be Witches on sale, usually with a lot of plastic junk on the front, free necklace or free, magic ring or whatever it was. And I think that's wonderful. So, and the stories could never, by any judgment, be called, what shall we say, silly or stupid or soppy. The style was kind of European manga, which was very cool. So very cool fashions and all the rest of it. And they were talking about adolescent subjects as well. So, it was quite sophisticated in that respect. So, since Witches, I'm not aware of anything that's come along. It could be I'm out of touch with whatever is happening on the newsstand, but I'm not aware of it. And it's a great shame because in Britain, at least, we are still drawn to the newsstand as opposed to the comic shop. So there are kids in particular who, for whatever reason, won't go in a comic shop or will not be particularly drawn to a comic shop. But they're there on the newsstand checking all the magazines. And that's the audience that we once had to the tune of 200,000 copies a week. Of
wow.
A lot of British comics like 2000 AD, Tammy, and so forth. And it would be nice to try and get that audience back.
I hear you, man. And honestly, the Misty section of Page Turners is one of my favorites. And also, hearing yourself talking about girls' comics, Alan Moore as well. I remember, I think he was being interviewed by Stuart Lee on a BBC show. And I loved him talking about, and now it's, forgive me, everybody, I don't mean, because the character, some modern audiences may cringe, the blind ballerina, who you also mentioned in Page Turners as well. And it just sounds like, beyond what you say, the soppy tropes that one might expect, you all put these characters through very extreme situations, which
Yeah.
is great, and it's inventive. And in the States, this woman Barbara Freelander worked at DC during the Silver Age, during starting in the mid '60s and maybe up till the very late '60s. And just hearing about the romance comics gave me a new appreciation for both the art and the stories. And as you say, fashion, was very much on the minds of these people as they made these comics. Even Archie, I think, would slip into, whatever the modern fashion moment was with Betty and Veronica. I think that's great. I really do. And I think I know too, I want to say either Rebellion or I think it's Rebellion. Whoever owns the rights to Misty now, as you say, I'm on their, oh, it is Rebellion. Well, yeah, I'm on their press list. So if it is, I got to check and see if I can download the PDF and enjoy some Misty and everything.
No, I mean, there's some good thrillers there, and the sad thing is that I started Misty off, and what I primarily based it on as a kind of technique that I think we all apply to various comics is you do a kind of kids version of adult stories. You take out the inappropriate elements, and so I did a version of or inspired by Carrie. So the lead story in Misty was Moonchild, which I think Rebellion have reprinted. And but there are so many modern stories that you watch and you think, my God, that would make such a great girls' comic story. I mean, some of them are very obvious, like, I don't know, Umbrella Academy or things of that sort. But Hunger Games, for instance, is a natural girls' comics. But there's others where you think, well, if things were scaled down and they're to a sort of to a 13 or 14-year-old age group. I'm thinking of Gone Girl, for instance, and some of those novels. There's so much potential there, and it's very, very exciting. It's almost like I think in Britain you have a lot of what we call YA text writers,
yes.
young adults. And sadly, it hasn't evolved into comics. In other words, I think all the talent has gone to write for YA, and so they will be all the kind of things that I'm talking about. They will have found their way into YA novels, and it's a pity we haven't done that. And so I'm, as I say, I've beaten the drum for that for. On page turners, because I suspect that there are various people who have considered doing another Misty. I mean, it's a natural. I mean, either side of the Atlantic, there's. It would be different, obviously, for an American audience. It might have a monthly packaging to it or whatever. But what could loosely be called a girls' supernatural. And I have to add on that, which probably I think wouldn't be a problem in the States, but it's a trap we fell into on Misty, and I kicked myself that I missed it at the time, which was we had serials which came to an end. That's fatal. You've got to have ongoing characters. They've got to keep running the whole darn time. So Moonchild lasted for whatever it was, 12 issues. It was very popular. And then it stopped, right? No, you've got to have Moonchild 2, Moonchild 3.
Sure.
And you've got to factor that in terms of the way things are done, because it's the familiarity. We all love Spider-Man and the Hulk, and we just want to see that just going and going and going with hopefully new energy for new generations. And so we made that mistake. So I hope that doesn't apply. And then another one that it sounds almost archaic, but it was hugely popular, a British genre, and I don't think you have the equivalent in the States. Football comics. football comics were huge in Britain, and they disappeared. And people will come up with their own reasons why, but I know why. It's because the creative energy behind them had disappeared. If you just got people kicking a ball over 10 pages of a comic, that's not very interesting. You've got to have a compelling drama behind it. So I kind of Bend It Like Beckham, the movie. You've got to have something where there's so much at stake. So when the hero or heroine is kicking a ball around, you really want to see that person is going to win. And I have no particular interest in it as a sports comic as such. But for a while, there was very serious interest. There was Britain's leading sports writer, football writer, journalist, was interested in getting behind it. And as with so many of these things, there just isn't enough energy behind it. And on that one, again, it's kind of relevant to mention this. The thing that actually founded that, but it could apply to other genres as well, was that the person who wanted this football comic to work, she had all the right connections. She probably could have got the right funding for it and so forth. But she wanted to do something that is anathema, I think, to all comic audiences the world over. She wanted it to be worthy. In other words, she wanted it to be, for want of another word, almost educational. Now, that can be fatal. You can get in your message, you can have your subtext, because there's so many problems in football. And she was describing some of them, and many of them I already knew. There's all the obvious stuff. There's what we call WAGs, wives and girlfriends, and there's drugs and so on. But there's another thing as well that I think is really important if you're a 12-year-old, 13-year-old wannabe. So many kids get cast by the wayside. In other words, there's a casualty rate, and that surely must apply in American sport as well. Someone is lined up for stardom, and things go wrong, and that kid is finished. He's all his hopes and dreams have crashed at the age of 13. I can't imagine just how awful that must be. I mean, that must be totally devastating. And so it's a great subject for drama. So I wanted to get into that. And also, of course, the other thing that happens in, but it needed to be it needed to be kept, what shall we say, within very narrow confines. Otherwise, it becomes too much of a social, was to deal with issues like child abuse and so on, because it's a big thing, certainly in the UK, of abuse by football coaches or, various other adults. So it's always going to happen if you've got adults interacting with children. And I think there are always ways to cover these things, but to cover them without it overwhelming the story, because then the kid is going to say, "No, I don't need this. Mum and dad can give me that lecture. I don't want to read it in a comic. I'm taking time out here." But there are all those, and another one that springs to mind. I think it's a little more prevalent in the States than in the UK. Paris Hilton, I think, wrote about some kind of boot camp that she went to as a teenager, and awful as it was for her, it's also a great subject for drama. In other words, these kind of where you get what shall we say, typically rebellious teenagers. And so there's various solutions to that, and some of them are good and some of them are not good. And one of the ones that's probably not very good is to send them off to some boot camp where they have a short, sharp shock. So those, if you like, that's the stuff of girls' comics, football comics, and I don't know. I mean, on occasion, you might need to make it in a science fiction, give it a science fiction veneer, because if it's too down to earth, a lot of people just want escapism or think they want escapism. So if it's set on another planet, they'll say, "Oh, that's all right." I mean, if you look at Harry Potter, it appears to be this wonderful world, escapist world. It's actually dealing with some very important issues for people growing up.
Agreed. Absolutely. And it's funny. Well, it is odd, as Mike says here. Weirdly, football comics died off as professional football entered a new age of popularity. Well, I don't know. These are streaming TV shows, but Ted Lasso, the Jason Sudeikis football comedy, I think is great, and I think it opened American eyes to the culture of football as it's played European wise. And you have that. The World Cup really last year, with all of its scandals and eye-opening, as documentaries showed us the behind-the-scenes stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, even a layman like myself knew that there was something kind of wrong with FIFA, but to really get into the nitty-gritty, I thought was interesting. And
these are great subjects for drama and ways of tipping young people off on the dangers or the challenges they face, and also if they're already in the middle of them, telling them that they're not alone, that they're, without being too worthy or woke about it, as we say in the UK, to say, look, we can understand what you're going through, so you don't feel isolated, which I think is the worst thing that can happen to any child, that they feel cut off from their peers, and
agreed,
what they're experiencing just feels very lonely and perhaps cruel.
No, I'm with you, man. Absolutely. Jiku, I always say his name wrong here. A wonderful commenter. 1 second. My computer is buffering a minute. There we go. Good evening or afternoon, Mr. Mills. I recently picked up the audio version of your book, Be Pure, Be Vigilant, Behave. Did you read it, Pat, or did someone read it for you? The audio.
No,
version?
I read it, and
I'm gonna have to get it. That's great, man. I mean, I have the book, but I would love to hear you narrate your story. I think it'd be terrific.
It's a lot of fun doing it, because anyone who's heard that version will know that there's some parts where I felt very strongly, and so there isn't that kind of what should we say, that balanced tone that's now become what should we say, almost ubiquitous with AI and everything. I think you can have AI versions of which sound no different, but yeah, I would love to do some audio versions of some of my other works. Maybe what I should do, because I think that's too commercially, it's quite difficult. In other words, you get money back on it, but it's not entirely economically viable. But maybe what I should do is read some short excerpts and put them up on YouTube, and that's on my to-do list of things to do for the future.
That's great. And I know, and I hope this doesn't come off. I'm not even thinking of the right word right now. My brain is fuzzy, but I understand where he's coming from. He's impressed at how passionate you are at your age, and again, we don't mean that pejoratively. We truly. How do you keep yourself so animated? And truly, Pat, it is honestly speaking to people that are older than myself, or even my contemporaries. It is wonderful to see people that are still creatively excited about what they do. But please comment on it.
Yeah, well, I think in some other media industries, it's actually fairly commonplace, and that's quite encouraging. You look at some film directors who are older than I am, and also people in the music business.
I was going to say composers, absolutely, yes.
Yeah. So I think, because occasionally I think, why am I still so animated about this business? And then I look at, is it Roger Waters in Pink Floyd? He's 80, I think. And then you've got Steven Spielberg, and I believe Clint Eastwood is on directing his last movie. He's another generation to me.
In his 90s, absolutely. It's amazing.
90s, my God.
Yes. And the output that he's had in the last 10 or 15 years is so incredible, and not just the dramas, but the documentaries he's made as well. No, I am so I mean, listen, man, and forgive me, I don't mean to step on your thoughts on this, but it's great because with years comes experience, and it's not so much wisdom as it is perspective. And I think that is
entirely true. Yeah, you have wisdom is a very it's more the fact, well, you did it another way and you got it wrong, so you get it right now. So I know that certain things do not work, and I would have discovered that 10, 15, 20 years ago. So I think that's part of it. But there's another element as well, in my case, and I suspect in a lot of creators' cases, which is, and I get into this in Page Turners, which is to discover what you're driven by. Now, I suspect that, all those people we're talking about, they're all driven by something. And the normal phrase for it, the normal word for it is the muse. Now, that just sounds like, oh, well, I say you're inspired to do this or that, because it's actually much deeper than that. It's more profound than that. And our society doesn't really like to linger on the muse. It's okay for writers, artists, musicians, and film directors to be a little bit eccentric and to talk to themselves or whatever. But if you're, if you're in IT or whatever, that would seem a little inappropriate. So I think people are discouraged from thinking about, why are you doing this? And of course, the normal, and I've been asking this question of young creators, and when I go to conventions, as far back as I think the 80s, and saying, because they say, what are your tips on being a writer? And my standard response to them, which wasn't really what they wanted to hear, was, why do you want to be a writer? What's driving you to do this? And of course, the standard answer might be, well, I grew up reading Marvel comics, or I grew up reading 2000 AD, and I hang out at conventions, and hey, if I do this right, I can make some money. And no, that won't do. That will not do. You've got to get in touch with your muse, and that's what Page Turners is about. And actually, it's the most profound element in the entire book. And the muse and what drives you is what motivates you to do it is everything. So I would guess, on the face of it, in the case of the Pink Floyd chap, his father dying, I think it was at Anzio. Now, on the face of it, that's what's driving him. In other words, that trauma of losing his dad and so on. I would say even that is just one level. It's actually something underneath it that, because lots of people lost their dads in combat, and they don't have his energy, his drive, and his controversy as well. So something is driving, and you need to get in touch with what that is. And so I've devoted an awful lot of time to I mention other books that I think are relevant, like there's a book called The War of Art, which I think is an American book. And basically it says, stop saying, oh, I'm going to write this tomorrow, write it today. In other words, get going. But it's getting in touch with the muse. What drives you? And so if you like, I'm driven, I'm very much in touch with that energy that's called the muse. I can describe its characteristics, and that's what animates me, if you like. But what it is, as a, to say, oh, it's just a figment of your imagination, or it's your brain DNA or something, or it's a psychic phenomena. I just don't think we do not have the vocabulary to describe it. we fall back on earlier cultures to try and describe what the muse is. So if you look up what the ancient Greeks called it, they actually called it the goddess of the muse. You know, so they had all these goddesses, which probably is a very useful primer for understanding all these subconscious influences. And they've obviously got gods and goddesses for everything. And they've probably got the edge on us because we ain't got it. I mean, what have we got? You know, I mean, joking aside, you could have some child who starts saying, I feel driven to, I don't know, you know, I hear these voices that tell me I should write a science fiction story or whatever. Well, as long as they're kept within bounds, no one's going to worry. But if they're really driven, they're going to be reaching for the Ritalin or something and saying, oh, no, this isn't good that you're
suppressing them.
I think the ancient Greeks had a better handle on what could loosely be described as the subconscious forces that motivate all of us. I mean, why do you get one person who spends their hobbies, their spare time doing wonderful things, you know, crocheting or some kind of extreme sport? And it isn't just writers. Writers and artists tend to be at the forefront of the muse, but it applies to sport and every kind of human experience. So I suppose, and it's a great shame that it isn't really focused on, because lots of people end up doing something they don't actually want to do, and they say, well, I've got to do it, you know, because I need health insurance, and I've got family, so I've got to do this job, and they're miserable doing it. But I think by getting in touch with the muse, whatever the muse is, I think it can be incredibly fulfilling, and particularly I think for young writers. So if you're driven to write or draw Spider-Man, good luck to you. But it's also useful to know why. What is it about Peter Parker that really reaches you? And another character does nothing for you. So, and once you actually make sense of that, you know, on the face of it, it might be, the obvious explanation might be, Peter Parker's childhood is similar to my own. You know, I've had this rough childhood, so I kind of identify with him. Well, that's taking you to one level, like with Roger Waters, but you've got to go deeper. And the bad news is you may not get the answers immediately. I mean, I understand my muse, but I'm talking from the, you know, after a long period of years.
Sure.
You know, if I was to go back to the 80s, I had no idea why I could only write satirical stories. And if I tried writing anything else, it never worked. You know what I mean? Because I think, maybe I should write something quote unquote normal. It never sold. It never sold. And the stories were okay, but it wasn't meant to be. And I think these, you know, forces of destiny and forces of the muse are far more important than we really acknowledge, because we're thinking, that's too weird. That's a bit spooky. We're not paying any attention to that, you know?
No, I understand what you're saying. And again, another great portion of the book that you spend on the muse, and also not only your successes, but the turndowns, your failures as well, documented in Page Turners. And that's why truly this is such a great book, Pat. And I'm really glad you're doing it. And again, I'm so glad that you are, alongside things like MI7 and new stories like in Space Warp and stuff, that you are telling your story alongside of it. I think it's very, very valuable. And again, I can say myself as a reader, I appreciate your perspective. All your thoughts on the muse, that's what made me slowly transition to podcasting from broadcasting. And at first I started it alongside my broadcasting. I got downsized because of COVID 3 years ago, and I still occasionally try to get a broadcast job. But I mean, it absolutely keeps me driven with what I'm doing with Word Balloon as a podcast. It's like, well, you can't shut me up. I'm sorry, everybody. even though the traditional radio and TV people may not be interested in my stuff, I have gathered my own audience, much as you have on Substack, and have my community, thankfully. And through Patreon, they support me as well as just watching and listening to what I have to say. So, no, I get it. And that's why I found Page Turners so valuable, and really appreciate what you've got here. It's out right now, everybody. You can get it either digitally or you can get the hard version as well. And here, I'm going to put up your Substack again here. Am I right here? Iconoblast?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Iconoblast at substack.com, everybody, for the audio audience. And yeah, as always, Pat, great conversation. I really appreciate your time. I hope we covered everything you wanted to cover. I'm very invigorated by this conversation as always.
No, I'm delighted, John. It was great, and I think your muse is definitely sending you in the right direction with social media. I think the other outlets you're referring to, I think they're now starting to be called heritage media or something, aren't they? Which is a bit scary. They're thinking, well, is it heritage already? You know what I mean? You're heading in the right direction. And I mean, if you think what social media is like today by comparison with, say, 6 years ago, it doesn't bear thinking where we could all be in 6 years' time. So it's an exciting time. So,
I'm with you.
With your career there.
Thank you, man, and likewise. And a couple final comments. An enormous thank you from Mike for all the enjoyment I continue to get from all his stories and publications, from Battle, 2000 AD, etc., onwards to now, considering me one of these subverted. And
thank you, Mike. Yeah.
Also says good interview, and thank you for the time, Mr. Mills, and happy holidays. Indeed, happy holidays, Pat, with Christmas coming. And everyone, obviously, if you haven't already watched The Star Beast, the first chapter of the 3-part anniversary special of Doctor Who, here in the States on Disney Plus, BBC overseas, and the various outlets of Doctor Who around the world. But so glad that Russell Davies took the time to be inspired by Pat and Dave's excellent story and give us that first chapter. So well done, and so glad that your Doctor Who work was recognized and compensated as well. So well done. I loved your analogy in the book about, well, I haven't been able to buy the swimming pool, but what kind of pool did you build? Is it one of those kind of shallow? What is it?
It's called a plunge pool. In other words, it's a small swimming pool. You can't swim in it, but you can stay cool. So it's
very good.
Plunge in, So it could just to put that in context to your listeners. The phrase we have in British comics, because we've got that kind of British cynicism. So whenever any kind of anything good turns up on the horizon, we say, I'm not building my I'm not digging my swimming pool yet. We'll wait and see. I'm not digging my swimming pool yet. And so that was my reaction when Russell T. Davies and the Doctor Who team got in touch. Well, I'm not going to dig my swimming pool yet. But yeah, I was fairly financially compensated. Not enough to dig my swimming pool, but enough to dig what we call here in Spain a plunge pool. That's still pretty darn good. And I shall hopefully be digging it very shortly and enjoying it before the next heat wave in the summer.
Understood. No, well, good luck with that. Good luck with everything. I'm going to be bothering you next year about MI7, and I certainly, I'm on the free side of your Substack, and you're very generous with what you give us for free. So that will help me stay in mind for when pending releases are. But certainly expect me to be bothering you in the new year with another conversation.
That would be fantastic. Thank you so much, John. It was great talking to you.
My pleasure, man. Thanks, everybody, for watching and listening. I think that does it for this week on Word Balloon. Next week, can I tease? I'll be talking to Jeff Johns, Gabriel Hardman, the great Ram V, among others, will be on. And also I'll be reviewing the latest chapters of Doctor Who and the Godzilla show, Monarch, and the like. So all that and more on Word Balloon Live. Thanks for watching, everybody. Stay safe, stay happy, stay healthy.